In a previous video, we examined the role of social media in connecting us more than ever before, while at the same time isolating us. We looked at the Jonathan Haidt data, showing how anxiety and depression have increased for young people as our culture has increasingly gone online. In another video, we talked about the changes in marriage for young people, with Westerners getting married and having children later in life. We also touched on the replacement rate, the number of children had per couple, and how it represents a future demographic transition. Related to this is the rising issue of male loneliness. This is a difficult topic to discuss because first, men don't like to talk about their issues. And second, if they do have them, they prefer to solve them themselves rather than complain. At the same time, if we look at the rise of the right in Western countries, like in the United States, Italy, and Germany, we have to discern where this phenomenon arises from. A large amount of unhappiness exists in the West, which has resulted in the emergence of new ideologies. A lot has changed socially in the last 50 years, and academia has neglected how things have changed for men. Sociologists tend to ignore men, as they benefited from historical biases. But statistically, men have the highest rates of homelessness, the largest amounts of traumatic brain injuries, the highest rates of incarceration, and complete acts of suicide the most. Things have changed a lot from men's monopolization of higher education to them now being outnumbered by women in universities at a ratio of 2-to-1. Men suffer from smaller friend networks and less social support, receive fewer compliments and more criticism, and due to the values of masculine culture, are discouraged to receive counseling for mental health. In a previous video, we talked about how men lose many of their social networks as they age. In terms of friendships, we can look at the psychology of men to understand this trend toward isolation. Men tend to be more object-based, and their reward systems are based around setting goals and achieving them. This means in video games, a man can simulate and fulfill all the desires for competence and autonomy he would otherwise experience in the world. Men can find a find of contentment in withdrawing to a small circle of their personal interests. So knowing this is how men can find friends, identify their passions, and find people who share them. We recognized in a previous video that online friends for men are often pseudonymous. Joining discords dedicated to your interests may be one way to meet new people. That said, men are most reliant on their spouses for support, yet a recurring theme in forums and mental health spaces for men is the difficulty of forming relationships. Church attendance and the values that encourage family formation have declined in our time. Spiritual values that view celibacy as a virtue have disappeared, viewing it instead as a secular value of shame. This in itself is a big change from the spiritual culture our civilization used to have. We've seen a loss of a sense of community in third spaces where people can meet, and we're increasingly atomized online. Discouraged about meeting new people in public, we're turning to apps to find partners. Thus, a lot of the loneliness issue derives from the transition of our social lives to being online. A problem with these apps is that the company's economic incentives are the opposite of the interests of their customers. A customer wants to find a partner and get off the application. But these companies make money when you're liking and swiping. Thus, the incentive is to give the customer just enough of a reward they stay subscribed, but never helping them make the final transition to meeting someone. If we look at demographics, there are two that disadvantage men. Men actually have a population surplus in most countries, which is concerning as it shows civilizations evolved to produce excessive men who could fight in war. In addition, if you're using apps, the gender ratio is about 2 men for every woman, which makes the experience much worse for individual men. A problem with apps is they commodify you and reduce you to a series of pictures. This takes a lot of the human element out of assessing you. If we look at the Maslow pyramid, love and belonging are central needs that we need to fulfill on the path to self-actualization. They're essential for our health and well-being, to our senses of self-worth and feeling wanted and accepted. Experiences of rejection over long periods of time cause one to socially withdraw and become frustrated. On these apps, a man can send hundreds of messages and get no response. There's also a paradox of choice for women, where the more messages you have to choose from, the more likely it is you won't choose any of them. In addition, when you do get a match, a huge amount of time is wasted on fake profiles and scams. One of the ways these companies could improve their apps is by creating a better experience for men. Men should have at least some basic opportunity to talk and arrange dates when they log on, and not have to experience the sense that they have no value. Since photos are so important, if the person you're writing doesn't have any written interests, it can be hard to come up with an opening question that makes an impression. An interesting point I learned from Healthy Gamer is that these apps create an experience of rejection that is unique in history. In pre-modern times, you might approach 7 people over your life and be rejected by 2 of them. Yet in today's time, you may approach thousands of people and find yourself rejected by almost all of them. This is an amount of rejection that our psyches aren't adapted to. Repeated rejections cause withdrawal and self-isolation. Male suicide is often the result of this, either men trying to connect and being rejected, or trying to create value and failing to do so. There was an experiment conducted in the 1960s called the Mouse Utopia, where a scientist put a population of mice in an enclosed space with ready access to food and resources. Without the hard struggle to satisfy their needs, the society itself became stratified and internally competitive. We can use this as an analogy to understand our time. With material prosperity and equality, the new adversity becomes a social one. If we look at the demographic question, we're living in a radical time. The next century is going to be the greatest transformation in human family life and reproduction in all of history. Biology may overrule ideology, and we may see a wave of people suddenly getting married in their mid-30s. Or we may see people stick to their antinatalist beliefs, causing the population to contract. Eventually, antinatalist groups will die out from a lack of members, and those who are natalist will be those who lead the succeeding generations. So we may see an aging population, an increased number of single people, and then a demographic contraction. After, the population will likely resurge as a new natalist view takes hold. If we think of how world religions say to be fruitful and multiply, this may itself be an historic product of humans seeking the most healthy sexual ethic.